Okay, so everybody look at this image that I have here on the screen. Okay? This right here was taken on this date, May 10th, 1869. Does anyone know what that image is about? Those are what? I'm sorry, Jesus? Rail splitters. Okay, that has to do with railroad workers. Good. Does anyone know what this is? It's like a celebration, says Ray. Good. Thank you. That's what it is. Jesus? Yes. Thank you very much. That's exactly what this is. So look, on May 10th, 1869, in a place called Promontory Point, Utah, the Transcontinental Railroad connected from east to west for the first time. Now notice in this image, there are a bunch of workers there, including 2 locomotives. And there's 2 men there shaking hands, right? I want to explain a couple of things about this that are going to connect to the lesson you're going to do. Okay? So the first thing I need to tell you about is in 1863, this happens during the Civil War. During the Civil War, Congress was run by mostly radical Republicans. Now the issue is that those radical Republicans would pass laws and legislation that mostly benefited the North, benefited industry. They wouldn't pass anything that would benefit the South because the South was in a state of rebellion, according to the North. So because the South had seceded and because the South was fighting the North, Northern radical Republicans called the South a land in rebellion, a territory in rebellion. So any laws they would pass would always benefit the North. Okay? Now I'm being kind of generous here when I say always because it's not all the time, but most of the time. Now one thing you need to understand is that when they passed this act in 1863, it allowed railroad companies to do something they couldn't do for the first time. And that is borrow land from the federal government so they could make a railroad line. And then once they made the railroad line, they were allowed to sell that land as if it was theirs. It's like if building the railroad was the condition for the land to belong to them. Okay? Now, the problem here is that when the railroad companies finished the railroads, they were required to sell that land. But most of them did not do it. Most of them decided to keep it for themselves. And then, later on, when the time was right and when the profits were highest, sell it for whatever price they wanted, rather than for the price the government had set. This is important for this reason. It's starting to show you that industries and the private sector, I'm talking about businessmen, are making decisions that affect the government and not the other way around. It's not as if the government is making decisions that affect business people. I guess what I hope you to get from this lecture is that industries, for a while, almost ran the government. They almost were the ones controlling what acts and what laws would pass or wouldn't pass. Now, that's important for you to know because in this day and age we live in, companies have so much influence and the government is so much on their side that some people argue that the same thing that happened here is happening now. That companies run the government. Think about what I'm telling you here. A corporation can get so rich and can get so powerful that it could make decisions that would affect laws and legislation. That's pretty impressive. That means that you have a lot of money and influence. Railroad companies had a lot of money and influence. Okay? All right. Now, when they finally meet here, the Central Pacific Line and the Union Pacific Line had been built primarily by whom? What were the workers that were building the railroad? Immigrants. Thank you. And then, get this. The Union Pacific Line, which is coming from east to west, from places like New York, Boston, Atlanta, all the way out to the west into Utah, that line is built by immigrants that come from Europe and places on the East Coast. But this line, the Central Pacific, was built primarily by one group of immigrants. Who do you think they were? Chinese immigrants. Thank you. The Chinese are the purpose of today's lesson. The Chinese people that built this railroad line never got a proper memorial. They never got proper recognition from the federal government for all the deaths and all the problems they had to endure while they were building the railroad line. Now, I'm going to show you a clip that talks about that issue. But what we're going to learn about today is why Chinese workers were prohibited from coming into our country after 1882.